He survived 638 assassination attempts. He turned a tiny island into the Soviet Union's most dangerous weapon. From revolutionary hero to dictator, this is the true story of the man who brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The legend of Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro Ruz was a profound paradox from his very beginnings. Born in 1926 in the Oriente province of Cuba, he was not a product of the downtrodden peasant class he would later champion. His father, Ángel Castro y Argiz, was a successful Spanish immigrant who had amassed a substantial fortune as a sugarcane plantation owner. This wealth allowed Fidel to receive an elite, Jesuit Catholic education, first at the Colegio de Dolores, and later at the prestigious Belén School in Havana. This paradoxical background, the scion of the land-owning elite who became the most passionate advocate for their destruction, was the first great irony of his life. His education, particularly his time at the University of Havana Law School starting in 1945, exposed him to the simmering political corruption and social stratification endemic to Cuba. He became a passionate student of history, political philosophy, and crucially, revolutionary tactics. Castro was not merely an idealist, he was a natural political animal, gaining a reputation for his fiery, hour-long speeches and his almost magnetic charisma. He saw Cuba as a nation suffocated by internal corruption and external overwhelming economic control by the United States. He was convinced that only a total, violent restructuring of society could achieve true Cuban sovereignty. Castro's early political activities were a blend of idealism and aggression. He participated in an abortive plot in 1947 to overthrow the dictator of the Dominican Republic, and he was present in Bogotá, Colombia, during the violent political uprising known as the Bogotazo in 1948. These experiences confirmed his belief in armed struggle as the sole path to power. The stage was set when, in 1952, the corrupt right-wing General Fulgencio Batista seized power in a military coup, canceling promised elections and establishing a US-backed dictatorship that was openly tolerant of American business and the mafia-run casino industry. Seeing the constitutional path blocked, Castro planned his grand, audacious military debut, the attack on the Moncada Barracks on July 26, 1953. The attack was a symbolic frontal assault on the second-largest military garrison in Santiago de Cuba. It was a complete disaster. The element of surprise was lost, and the rebels were quickly overwhelmed. Most were killed, many after being captured and tortured. Castro and his brother Raúl were among the few survivors, apprehended days later in the countryside. The subsequent trial provided Castro with his most powerful political platform. Acting as his own defense attorney, he turned the trial into a political indictment of the Batista regime. He delivered a 4-hour masterpiece of revolutionary rhetoric, famously concluding with the line, "Condemn me, it does not matter. History will absolve me." This speech was not just an emotional plea. It was a carefully constructed historical and legal manifesto that provided the intellectual blueprint for the revolution, demanding land reform, education, healthcare, and economic nationalization. Though sentenced to 15 years, the manifesto, smuggled out and distributed, turned a military failure into a defining political legend. Due to political pressure, Castro was amnestied in 1955. He immediately went into exile in Mexico, where the true revolutionary movement took shape. It was here he met Ernesto Che Guevara, an Argentine physician whose commitment to Marxist revolution was absolute. Che, suffering from asthma but radiating intellectual fervor, became Castro's most trusted ideologue and military tactician. Together they organized the core group of 82 revolutionaries who would sail back to Cuba, aboard the dilapidated yacht, Granma, in 1956. The Granma landing was another military catastrophe. The yacht was delayed, landing in the wrong location, and the rebels were immediately ambushed by Batista's forces. Of the 82 men, only around 12 to 20 survived the initial onslaught, fleeing deep into the rugged, remote Sierra Maestra mountains. From this tiny, desperate band, including Fidel, Raúl, and Che, the Cuban Revolution truly began. The 2-year guerrilla campaign that followed was a masterclass in psychological and asymmetrical warfare. Castro's strategy focused less on winning pitched battles and more on winning the loyalty of the rural population. His rebels adhered to strict moral discipline, treating the campesinos, peasants with respect, providing rudimentary healthcare and education, and punishing theft. This stood in stark contrast to Batista's army, which became increasingly brutal, corrupt, and demoralized. Crucially, the urban network of the 26th of July movement, led by figures like Frank Pais, ensured the flow of supplies and funds. The turning point came when a young American journalist, Herbert Matthews of the New York Times, trekked into the Sierra Maestra and conducted an exclusive interview with Castro in 1957. Matthews painted Castro not as a communist radical, but as a freedom-fighting Democrat. This coverage gave Castro immediate international legitimacy, undermining U.S. support for Batista. As the Cuban army's morale collapsed and the U.S. finally withdrew military aid, Batista saw the inevitable. On New Year's Day, January 1, 1959, Batista fled Cuba. Fidel Castro marched triumphantly into Havana, hailed by the masses as the ultimate liberator. The initial year of the revolution was characterized by rapid radical change. Castro initially denied being a communist, but the true nature of his government soon became clear. He quickly consolidated all power, eliminating all potential rivals, including former comrades. He nationalized virtually all American-owned property, seizing billions of dollars worth of sugar plantations, oil refineries, and utility companies. This was the point of no return. President Eisenhower immediately cut off diplomatic relations and initiated the first plans for regime change. The 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, inherited by the new President John F. Kennedy, was the CIA's first major attempt to overthrow Castro using Cuban exiles. The operation was an unmitigated public humiliation for the United States. Castro's forces, already prepared, crushed the invasion within 3 days. The victory was a propaganda coup for Castro, cementing his image as an invincible figure who had successfully repelled American aggression and pushing him definitively into the arms of the Soviet Union. The climax of his reign, and the peak of global tension, came in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. In response to U.S. missiles in Turkey and seeking a permanent defense against another U.S. invasion, Castro secretly agreed to allow the Soviet Union to deploy offensive nuclear missiles on Cuban soil. When the U.S. discovered the sites, the world stared down the barrel of nuclear war for 13 terrifying days. Castro famously advocated for Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev to launch a first strike against the United States if the U.S. proceeded with an invasion, a radical position that deeply alarmed both the Americans and the Soviets. The crisis was resolved only when Khrushchev and Kennedy negotiated the removal of the missiles without consulting Castro, leaving him furious but secured. Castro's personal political longevity is unparalleled. Over the course of his 49-year reign, he survived as the primary antagonist to 9 different U.S. presidents, from Eisenhower to Clinton, and outlasted his primary backer, the Soviet Union. The CIA and Cuban exiles waged a constant covert war against him, resulting in an estimated 638 assassination attempts. These plots ranged from the absurd, exploding cigars, a poisoned milkshake, a specialized bacteria-laced wetsuit, to the serious, sniper attacks and organized bombings. His survival fed the myth that he was either incredibly lucky or supernaturally protected, a symbol of Cuba's indomitable defiance. Domestically, Castro enacted profound contradictory social change. His greatest successes were in the fields of social welfare. He launched massive, effective campaigns that virtually eliminated illiteracy from the island and established a free, universal healthcare system that remains world-renowned. Yet these social gains were paid for by the complete destruction of civil liberties. Cuba became a brutal one-party totalitarian state. Political dissent was ruthlessly suppressed. Tens of thousands of opponents were imprisoned, and summary executions were common, driving a massive, desperate exodus of Cubans, the Mariel boat lift being a prime example, to the United States. Internationally, Castro became the global face of revolutionary anti-imperialism. His policy of revolutionary internationalism was aggressive. He sent tens of thousands of Cuban troops to support communist and anti-colonial movements, most famously in Angola and Ethiopia, directly challenging U.S. and South African interests in Africa. His active role as a global revolutionary made him a central figure in the non-aligned movement and a major player in proxy wars across the Third World. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Cuba lost its $6 billion annual economic subsidy. The island was plunged into the devastating special period, marked by severe food and energy shortages. Despite the economic cataclysm, Castro refused to abandon the communist ideology, a testament to his unbreakable political will. In 2006, due to severe intestinal illness, he formally stepped down, handing power to his younger brother, Raul Castro, marking the end of the long era of personal rule. Fidel Castro died in 2016 at the age of 90. His legacy remains one of the most hotly contested in modern history. Was he the selfless liberator who returned dignity and land to his people? Or the ruthless tyrant who extinguished democracy and plunged his nation into economic stagnation? What would history look like if Castro had not survived the Moncada attack? Was his survival a curse or a blessing for Cuba? Did his socialist achievements outweigh the cost of totalitarianism? We await your detailed analysis in the comments below on Bamboo Story.